Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me and doing this.
Sure.
Super casual, super laid back. Uh, I tend to just have conversational style um, interviews. I hesitate to call them interviews because I don't necessarily formulate a bunch of questions or any of that. They're really, really more like conversations um, because that's what I like to do. I like to just explore and kind of see where it goes and tend to talk a lot about. I mean, the overarching theme is accountability and vulnerability. And I sent you an email this morning. I don't know if you saw it or not. Just sort of
I did.
like from the lens of this, I think like the journalism piece is really fascinating, especially in today's culture. So,
Yeah.
however deep you want to dive into that, that would be fun.
Well, I can be free frank about it, I think. I
Okay.
don't think I'll get fired. So
Yeah. Well, the reality is it's an up and coming thing. So depending on how wide you want to share it, I'm not sure how many people if it'll get back to anybody that has any
right.
authority. But yeah, I just sort of roll with it. So
Sounds good.
it can go as long or as short as we go. I'm also kind of fascinated by the voice acting piece. I think as a podcaster, a lot of people would be
Sure.
interested in knowing what that
You
looks
bet.
like. So we're just going to kind of roll from there.
Let's do it.
I do throw it up on YouTube. It goes up on all the podcast platforms. So there is the video piece. So, you're a pro at this. So like if there's a thing we got to recut or redo, just a couple seconds of dead air to give me a place to cut works out really well. For my novice skill set.
I know you'll make me look good.
Well, you look great already. I like the blurred background. It looks great. I just learned that was a thing quite recently. So awesome. So yeah, here we go. Super grateful for you joining me today. I'm excited to talk to Dave. Dave Courvosier is not just a longtime friend, but he is also a journalist, and not just a journalist. I mean, he's a father and a husband and a voiceover actor, which I'm really fascinated by. Uh, but the thing that really drew me to reach out to Dave, and it was kind of fortuitous because he had been on my list of people to call, and I kind of been chickening out. And then he called me for something, and I was like, "Oh, this is good. Okay." So while I have you, let me be brave enough to say, "Hey, would you be willing to come and join me?" And he graciously said yes. But Dave, you've been working in the field of journalism for I don't want to age you, but 30 plus years now.
40 all in all.
Wow.
Yeah. Most of
Okay.
those as an anchor.
Okay. And that's news anchor and radio or
TV news anchor. Yeah.
yeah, that's fascinating. So did you know early on that you wanted to be
Oh my gosh.
a news
I
anchor or
can't
was that
say
like
that. I struggled with what I wanted to be when I was a kid. I entered into college thinking I was going to be a geneticist, but then I was lousy at chemistry, so I switched majors a few times and actually got a degree in education and went back and got a master's in that. And yet I never taught. I just
no,
stumbled into broadcasting through radio. So,
really?
yeah.
That's great. And so and radio was short-lived and you very quickly moved into television.
Yeah. There was, I was just, this was in Grand Junction, Colorado. I was working at a top 40 station and I had started doing just little vignettes for the local TV station. A little show called, Cash. Oh, I can't even think of the name of it now. Cash movie or something like Big Money movie, something like that. And where there's a schlumph sitting there on camera picking phone numbers out of a fishbowl. You read the number, you call the
Nice.
number. If the person's watching, they win a prize. That kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And the owners actually thought that maybe I'd look pretty good on camera, so I pitched being a morning anchor, and they bought into it, and that was
That was
never
it.
stopped from there.
That was it. So journalism is a really fascinating thing to me because there's
Yeah.
so much of our culture is driven by what
Mm-hmm.
we hear and what we see and what we read. And I spend a lot of time talking about accountability and vulnerability on this particular podcast. And a lot of that has to come down to like, especially in the last few years, or we can go back as far as like the most recent or the election of Donald Trump and the most recent election and all the things about misinformation and fake news. And so much has come out. And so I've spent a lot of time sort of talking about how important it is for us to hear things, receive information, but also sort of take it with a grain of salt, or hear it and then, like, kind of the, old adage, trust but verify, right? And
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by someone who's been involved in this industry since the 70s, or, well, 40 years,
Yeah.
which takes you back to the
Late
80s,
70s.
right? Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. So I mean, you have got to have seen it just transform into something, you know, and I'd love to get your take on that, and see where it
Okay.
takes us.
Well, I hope you don't mind my just rattling on then.
No, it's a loaded
I think
question.
it's
With
it's a huge question. I think it's important to mention the business of broadcasting as well, because it's really driven the journalistic side. Usually, there's this line drawn between a sales and editorial or news, and that line is becoming very blurred. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll see throughout most newscasts today, all peppered through the newscast, you'll see sponsored by, or so and so paid for this, or and that's them reaching into the newscast, which I think is kind of sacrosanct and shouldn't be there. But it happens because the almighty dollar is really bidding these corporations that own stations now, and there's really 4 or 5. Other than the network-owned stations, there's Gray, Sinclair, Scripps, which owns my station, and Nexstar. Those 4 own, I'd say, 80% of the markets or the stations in this country, and Sinclair is very conservative. The other 3 are, mostly liberal, but bottom line is their stakeholders are asking, for the money flow to continue coming in.
Yeah.
Well, that's hard when the viewership is eroding.
Yeah.
So they keep doing more and more desperate things to get viewers. And you'll notice a very sensationalistic bent, to the news, no matter where you watch it, be
Yeah.
it network or local.
How like, it's interesting to me that, because I think of news, and I've not watched cable news, and I've not lived in Las Vegas for almost a decade now. For probably about that time when we left Colorado, or when we left Las Vegas and moved to Colorado, I sort of was like, let's not do the cable thing. Let's just stay. Streaming was coming more and more. So I get a lot of my news through the internet, and
Sure.
and I don't see a lot of the media stuff. But I'm curious, like, just even in talking about the news, we talked about the business side of it, which I'm actually dealing a lot with, like with church, right? Like, my
Mhm.
wife and I in the last 2 years have returned to church, and I actually now am a part-time employee of our church. And there's this business side to faith, and that's just such a weird dichotomy for me.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it, but I have to be very mindful, and I'm trying to set very good boundaries about what the business side of this is and what my faith journey looks like. And I imagine that you've had to do that personally, because at some point, over the course of the years, as the dollar becomes more relevant, the news becomes grayer, facts become. Am I getting that right? Is that tricky for you?
I'd say the attitude in news is they're grasping. They're grasping to hold on to viewers, and it's not going to work, because only above 35 are there really consistent, loyal viewers. The rest are getting it, right off their phone.
Yeah.
And so over time, that younger set is going to become middle-aged and older, and they're not going to watch. It's
Yeah.
not their tradition to watch TV news. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, a sizable portion of buying Americans, and that's the demographic, is what age group is spending the most dollars? Well, it's baby boomers still, and they're
Yeah.
very loyal and active viewers. And so we do have them still. But I also want to say that along with the dollar factor in the business of broadcasting, there's the factor that they all realize is that those viewers are going away for broadcast, and they're going onto the internet. So all news operations are moving a sizable portion of their operation to internet streaming, websites, social media. That's where a lot of the news gathering process, the result of that, is going. For instance, when we send reporters into the field, they pretty much have to file some sort of information on the story they're covering online first. And then, we wait till 5 or 6 o'clock to get it on the news. And that's, that's just the immediacy of it all. And that begs the question of how well was this information confirmed? How was it vetted? Are we just interested in getting the news on first and then worrying about the facts later? Or confirming it with the authorities and the proper channels, and then getting it on the news. There's this funny little quote going around the newsrooms lately, and that's like, well, don't let facts get in the way of a good story. And that's what it's come down to. I mean, you hear more and more error correction on air. We're sorry, we got the facts on that wrong. Here's what, and it's apologize later, but get it on the air now.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a pretty big shift. I was listening to Matt Taibbi in an interview, and I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He's an independent journalist.
No.
Now he writes a lot for Substack, and I believe worked for a long time for Rolling Stone magazine. And he had a really interesting conversation about what you just said, about how fast news is, and he put a lot of the onus on that on Twitter and some of the other social media.
Twitter's huge.
How fast we're getting things, and referenced some MSNBC reports that were really done through tweets, and everyone's trying to be first past the post, and then it was, the facts were correct, but the nuance and the context between there really shifted the narrative, right?
Well, it even goes back to Gabby Gifford. If you'll remember that she was shot in Arizona, she was a local U.S. representative,
absolutely.
And the first report's out where she's dead. She's just gone. Well, obviously she's not, and she wasn't dead. And so that kind of error just creeps its way into the news gathering process, and it's dicey. It's not good. I think
what's the conversations like? What's the pushback like? If you can be open about that, like when they're having the conversations about, because I think like there's some truth in jest, right? So like, don't let the facts get in the way is kind of a joke, but it's also a little bit of a low key permission to just get the story out.
So let me speak to a lot of micromanagement going on in corporate overlords in the newsroom. Every news director has a boss at the corporate level, and those people are listening to their bosses, the corporate bosses, and saying, our shareholders want more money, so let's bleed these newsrooms for more and more equity, and that means the news process gets a little gray, like you said. It's we're pushing the sensationalism. I mean, the word breaking news means nothing anymore. It's all broken. I mean, what's breaking anymore? It gets to the point where you've used enough superlatives like shocking and surprising and drop your jaw that nobody drops their jaw anymore. It's there's no word for what is truly breaking news, because it's already been breaking on lesser levels all along.
Do you think that lends to like a sort of a desensitization of
absolutely
what's
and that's
relevant,
why viewers are dropping off? They're not fools. We're not fooling anybody with this stuff. They're realizing that the news has less efficacy. And so people ask me, where do you get your news, Dave? And I'm like, well, I go to 10 or 12 sites online across the political spectrum, and I try to find the truth in the middle somewhere. That's as best you can do these days.
How hard is it for you to separate the profession from you personally? Because I know you to be a really well thought, intelligent, pretty positive guy, not very emotionally charged. and I would think for me, like I could never I'd be sitting in that chair going, but that's not, what? Like, how do you navigate that? Or is that just like, you've been doing it so long?
This gets into an area I'm probably not really comfortable about, but I will say that, because I want to keep my job for now, but numerous surveys have been done on with using the subject of working news people, working journalists. So a survey is done, and the population is news journalists, and consistently across the board, they label themselves as liberal 80% or more, sometimes higher. So working in that milieu, you've got to really buck that trend as well. It's it really comes down to words. And this is why words are so important. This is why the First Amendment is so important, is because you can't squelch certain thoughts or words. You can't say they're bad, or you can't say they're hateful, because they might consist of something worthwhile to the other side.
I'm really fascinated by and trying to figure out how much energy to put into sort of a lot of what's happening with voices being shut down. I've always been a very,
Huge,
very pro First Amendment, pro
huge.
all the amendments. Like I could consider myself a constitutionalist on some level.
Yes.
Like I think that those things are important. And it seems like I saw something yesterday that said, democracy used to mean something different. Now it means if you don't agree with the majority, we're just going to shut you down.
Yeah.
And it really struck me, like it certainly feels that way. And I don't know if that's the truth. Um, but yeah, I definitely wonder how fast moving information is. And therefore then you got to question the validity of the information and how do we manage that. And so I love the idea. I mean, I think I try to do the same. I don't know that I do 10 to 12 sources. I probably have five that I bounce around with. And
Well, on a good day,
I'm
I do 10 to 12.
yeah, and
On a
I'm
bad day, I
lucky, and I
do.
think you're in the business, so it's
Yeah.
kind of easier for you. But like for the regular person who's working 50 hours a week and has kids to run to practices and schools, it's hard for them, I think, to to do that level of reading or paying attention. And so I think the default is a lot of people they just tune it all out, and then they're uneducated, and that's
Well,
almost as dangerous. Yeah.
what they tend to do is go where they're comfortable. So Facebook has kind of caused this. Social media in general has caused this polarity, which is based on people aggregating in their tribe, people who believe like they do, and then they sit there. They don't look at the other side. They don't listen to the other
Yeah.
side at all. So if I were to
Yeah.
say, you get 5 to 10 minutes, visit MSNBC and then visit Fox.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the middle, there's the truth, because they both hype their side.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. Yeah, I struggle with this a lot, and the First Amendment is so important because I see mostly liberal oligarchs of social media just controlling who gets to be on their site.
Yeah.
Twitter, is banning certain voices because they say it's hateful. Well,
Yeah.
it's not hateful. It's the other side. And it may not be language you don't like to hear. And this is where language is so important. Now, the concept has been floated about language being violent. Well,
Yeah.
no, it's not. Sticks and stones may hurt my bones and all that stuff. Like you really can't let words be violent. They can be hateful, yes, but most of them are just other points of view.
Yeah, and really, like, I get flack from this from some of the people that I talk to, because I often say, like, I can't be held responsible for how you receive information, because you and I can have a conversation and everything I say you agree with, and someone who's listening disagrees with. So that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. It's the difference, right? And so I wonder if you have thoughts, since you've been involved in the dissemination of information, probably more than anybody I personally know. Do you have thoughts into how or why do you think it really is the shareholders? Like, news used to not be a public entity. It used to be, there were, a lot of these independent, privately owned stations and guys with, and we've all seen the movies. They got the little building with the antenna on it, and it's small time. But as they've gotten bigger, and I wonder, do you think cable news was like the catalyst for most of this, where it became?
It played a part. I mean, but I think of cable news, and the promise of cable years ago was, pay this amount per month and no commercials. Well, that's gone for sure. I mean, they're still,
and that was the promise with streaming, and we have streaming.
Same thing. I mean, advertisers are going to find their way into every product. What we have to do as journalists is to say, no, this doesn't cross that line. I mean, you get to use us to tell the news, but you don't get to insert yourself in the news. And they want to do that all the time because that's where people are watching. That's where the eyeballs are. So let's put just a little sign in the back of the weather, or let's just say sponsored by. And the next thing you know, you've got this total dumbing down of the news. First of all, because it's sensational. Second of all, because there's ads all through it.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we kind of stopped watching a lot of the cable news was the tickers, and it started with just a bottom ticker like Sports Center, which made sense because sports, you don't really need to give your full attention. But then I'm trying to listen to information, but then there's like the weather on this side, and there's the stock ticker on this side, and then there's something. And then I just saw this video, and it was a video of the recent coverage of what's happening in the Ukraine. And in the middle of that coverage, there's literally like fires and bombs and reminiscent of what I remember watching 24-hour news during the first Iraq invasion. It had that same kind of feel, but then 70% of the screen became an advertisement for Applebee's, and there were three guys.
That's a meme actually on the internet right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just blown up, and it's like we're living in a Coen Brothers.
That tells you where we're at. You know,
this is where we're
to pay the
right?
bills, and more they expect that the money will keep coming in, but the viewers are going away. So how do you balance that? Well, you sensationalize it more and more. You make it more gripping, even though the news, let's face it, there's not that much news out there. Like look at a station in the Midwest. That's a smaller station. They've got a half hour to fill. The advertisers have bought the time. So what are we going to do with this half hour? Well, we're gonna more or less make some news so that we can fill it. There may not be that much news. There may not be wrecks or casualties or court cases or anything, but we got to fill it with something. So let's make up something, and that's a lot of what you see today.
Right. You think that's why a lot of those stations have gone to, and I know you've seen, probably the little video clips that run around where it's like every news station is saying essentially the same thing. Like you mentioned, there's 4 or 5, and I think that's kind of where you got the AP that's kind of like running the feed.
Yeah, AP, New York Times is hugely influential, and it's very liberal. I mean, it's made a lot of mistakes that nobody's calling them on because they're so powerful. CNN is liberal. The basic news conglomerate of the Northeast is liberal, and so they control the narrative. And to speak against that is really running uphill. You have to go pretty far up the journalistic chain to get permission to counter that. And it's words. A little argument I got into with my assistant news director was using the word riot for the January 6th attack. I didn't want to call it a riot. Why didn't I want to call it a riot? Because for some 6 months during the year of 2020, there were riots all over, including Portland and Washington, D.C., where people were firing bombs and causing fires and just general mayhem for about 6 months. And the media refused to call it a riot. So you get it was one day of some attacks on the Capitol. They wanted to call it a riot and an insurrection. And I'm like, no, it was an attack. It was a violent attack, but it wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't a riot. Well, I got overruled. In fact, I got called into the principal's office over it and written up because I refused to say the word riot. And so that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating and unfortunate because, I think the flip side in a more conservative environment, there may be some like the pendulum swinging the other way, right? Where it's not even violent. It's just, I think, some members of Congress have come out and said, oh, it's perfectly normal civil discourse. And we're like, wait a minute, let's not call it that.
No, it's not. See, that's why it's in the middle. The truth is in the middle somewhere. And that's why as a news consumer, you really need to take everything with a grain of salt, look through all your sources and, decide for yourself the truth. Listen to the words. If they're using superlatives, like shocking and, it just gets old. Where is the truth? I think we all yearned for, if you can remember it, the Walter Cronkite and the Huntley Brinkley days, Eric Severide and Frank Reynolds, where they just kind of told the truth and you got to decide.
Yeah. The news used to be really boring. Like as a kid, I think I was born the year you graduated college. But, as a kid in the early 80s, I remember, we had one TV with 7 channels and every night, doesn't matter what channel you picked, at 5 or 6, you were watching, a guy in a suit read you, in my opinion, at that point, boring information. There was no, like the graphics were you didn't have like the man in the street as much. And hindsight looking back, I'm like, well, it needed to be that on some level.
Well, that's the other thing.
The facts, right?
Yeah, the news gathering tools are very impressive these days. The immediacy of it is just toxic, intoxicating, and toxic some cases. But yeah, because it lets you get the news right where you're at to the masses immediately, and that's where this process of vetting and confirming must come in, or else you're just spreading rumors.
Yeah, it's so true. I have a joke that everything I know about the Kardashians is non-consensual because I'll be on my phone or I'll be with my kids and they're telling me things, or my phone will pop up and it's who dating who. And I'm like, this isn't new. I don't care about this. So someone will ask me something and I'm like, oh yeah, I heard. And I'm like, wait, why do I even know that? And how did I retain that
Yeah.
information? So it's just the massive amounts of content.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to hear that from someone who's in the midst of it. And I appreciate just the candor with which you're
Well,
willing to talk about it,
I
because it's
appreciate that.
refreshing.
It's we just forget how extremely impressionable the news is. It's like video games. I can't believe people don't think video games are hurtful to young people, because it's
Mhm.
all death and destruction. And that video, especially for, believe it or not, for men who are more visual and don't think as much about what they're seeing,
True.
it's really deadly for these video games. And the news has become the same way. I mean, we're showing all kinds of crap on the news, death and destruction, and
Mhm.
pushing that edge farther and farther. Is what, should we show the dead body on air? Get the widow on the set, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we're pushing that, and it's having an effect. These visual impressions are hugely influential.
Yeah.
And we can't minimize that.
Yeah.
These tools we have for news gathering are really impressive these days, and they're immediate, but we got to be careful with them.
Yeah. I agree. It's things that I've seen on television or on in print used to have like the warning labels, right? Like, we're going to show you some graphic content if you got little kids in the room, and I can't get to my remote fast enough to shift the channel. And we're lucky that we homeschool and we have a pretty open relationship with our kids. So
Right.
we have really honest conversations with them about what they may have seen,
That's great.
and so we can help add those layers of context to it. Um, but it sort of begs the question, and since we're having such an open conversation, yeah, I'd love your thoughts on what's become this buzzword of misinformation. Because I did a podcast the other day, and I'll kind of just tell you where I stand on it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, I feel like it's being a word that's kind of being weaponized. Like, you talk about words having meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that we get into these places where, like, defund the police doesn't really mean defund them; it just means shift the money somewhere else. But those words,
Well,
in
yeah, or fake news. I mean,
yeah,
I worked up a whole graphic that I was going to post on Instagram, and I ended up not posting it because it was a little controversial. But basically, the meme said, "Just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean it's misinformation."
that's where
And
I'm at.
that's really where it's at. Is you can't you can't outrightly dismiss certain information just because you don't agree with it. It may
Yeah,
not, it may hurt you to hear it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that
right.
someone else's. And there's also another meme that says, you're not just allowed to your opinion. Everybody has your opinion. You're allowed to your opinion. No, it's you're allowed your educated opinion. Learn
Mhm.
something about the topic you're arguing
Yeah,
passionately for before you argue passionately for it. Don't
yeah,
just come out with full emotion and just off the cuff emotions on that. Be learned. If you're going to get into the fray on a topic and debate that, be learned about it.
yeah,
Get the
yeah.
facts, the real facts.
I think it's this is where social media, and I have a lot of
Ah,
friends who hate social media, and I don't. I love it because I'm able to keep in touch with people like yourself who I don't get to see all the time. I'm able to learn. I mean, I've made friends
yeah,
that I met
yeah.
online first,
It
and
has real
then
positives.
there's real positives to it. And I think we've given up, and this is where for me, like, the accountability comes in, is like, we blame the news, we blame social media, we blame the government
But
for
it's us.
decisions that we're making.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
we're
choosing to
allowing it.
believe,
Yeah,
and like, my whole stance on the misinformation was, we already have a word for that, and that's called a lie. And then everything else is just data. Everything else is just data. We get to take it
yep.
in and we go, this works for me, this doesn't, this needs more context. And I think we've sort of, in this, with the polarity and the of our culture right now, it's like everybody's fighting to be right, and everybody's fighting for their side, instead of recognizing, like, we're all on the same team.
Yeah, we're all
And
Americans.
it
But this
yeah,
misinformation thing is, well, we know for a fact that outside forces are entering our social media sphere and just injecting outright lies. It's been
right.
proven, Romanians, whoever, North Koreans, Russians, whatever. So you got to filter through that. And then you have to filter through um, the really tilted views of a lot of Americans who are also posting on, and they haven't done their homework. They haven't become learned about their opinion, and they're posting or reposting lies. And that's what makes it's a subterfuge you got to wade through to
Yeah,
find the truth.
yeah. And I think it's exhausting. I wonder where
It is.
because I feel and I've shared this with others. And it's kind of why I started the podcast, because I sort of did it reluctantly, and I felt more of being called to than let's do this. Because let's face it, there's enough podcasts out there for all of us, and then some, right? So who needs another, person doing a podcast? But I felt like if I could help people understand that what's happening to them is their choice. They get to navigate that and choose that, and help people understand, like, we have to go back to, no matter how exhausting it is, we have to keep having these conversations. We have to, those people who don't have an educated opinion but have an opinion, and they're usually the louder of the groups, to be able to say, well, here's some other resources maybe. And even that's been weaponized when people said, well, I did my own research, or I've looked into it, and then that gets flipped into, well, you just don't want to talk about it, right? And so I've had to like reframe things I say, where I talk to someone and I go, well, I read some other articles, and they're like, oh, you did your own research. Okay. And that puts me in a box. And I'm like, well, no, I don't fit in that box. I'm just letting you know that, yes, I've read my 10 to 12 sources. Have you seen these other ones? Because all you're doing is sort of parroting one source that maybe you missed the retraction, maybe you missed the context. And how do you guys do, like, that's been a layer for me that I find really frustrating is there's the headline, and then you have to read the article, or you have to watch the story for the context. But a lot of times there's you guys are restricted by time, so there's a lot of context.
And that's another limitation of TV news, is that it's really anymore just a headline service. I know. So we have what we call packaged reports, or packages, that are pre-recorded and narrated by the reporter, and the images are put together with an editor, and that's a story. It's a package to us, and those are now pretty much limited to 1 to 1.5 minutes, maybe. You're lucky if, as an investigative reporter, you get 6 minutes for your deep investigation. So, to me, that's just really limiting. So we are nothing more than a headline service in TV news, especially locally. So if you really want depth, you've got to go to print. I mean, and nobody has the attention for that anymore. Nobody wants to read a 20-minute, 30-minute article. Yeah. They just
140 characters, man. I got 140 characters, and that's it. Because how do you unpack, like, we just celebrated, and I use that term very loosely, the 10-year anniversary of Trayvon Martin's death. How do you do a minute and a half and do that any justice?
Well, they do. They try, and sometimes it's very artful, and they do a fair representation. But it's the writing has to be more and more economical and frugal, and you miss something there in between the lines.
Yeah. Who do you think's doing it best? I know the bar's low, but like,
I don't think anybody's really getting it right, and that's a really harsh judgment. But I like Wall Street Journal. I think they really struggle to get it right. That's one of my main sources, and I'll leave it there.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. I imagine it's hard being in it, being able to. So do you have journalists? Because I found myself not aligning with any entity. I found myself starting to follow journalists, whether it's and wherever they're at, whether it's on Substack, or whether it's they wrote a piece for the Atlantic, or they wrote a piece for Rolling Stone, or they wrote a piece for, because like Rolling Stone to me has just gone off the rails as a publication. But if there's a band I like or a thing I like, I'll read it. But if it's written by a specific author, specific journalist, I'm much more likely to grab it and want to read it. So do you have
some really smart people, today publishing either online or on video or blogging or yes, Substack, as you mentioned. But again, you've got to, if you really want the truth, you've got to temper the people you follow by following some people that you don't necessarily like or agree with.
Yeah, I agree. I think you got to be willing to go into the lion's den, and
you got to listen.
I find myself taking out all the sensational words, right? Like every third word, I'm like, okay, ignore that one. So even when I'm reading it, if it's an adjective, I kind of glaze over it. So just give me the information, because it's all those adjectives and all those superlatives, like you said, that sort of spin the narrative into
Yeah, I can usually tell within the first two paragraphs of any article I read online, what their political bent is, because like you said, you can pick out those words. There are some operations that are trying to be totally neutral. I think The Nation is one, and I believe it's a broadcast that's coming out of Chicago, and they try to be just vanilla, plain, clear, no frills, and it's not particularly engaging, but you get pretty much unadorned news.
Yeah, interesting. Man, we could spend hours and hours unpacking the industry of television news and print media and how we're getting information. I want to shift gears a little bit though, because you in your journalistic space shifted yourself and dove into voice acting.
Right.
And like, not just like, oh, let me see if I can get some gigs. You wrote a book about voice acting. You started a foundation for voice actors.
That's right.
It doesn't seem like Dave does anything sort of on the outs, on the edge. Like, you are all in.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about your voice acting stuff. What was that just?
Well, when I got to a certain point in my journalism career, I realized that this wasn't going to last forever, and I needed something else to do. And so I launched into voice acting, thinking, well, how hard can this be? I've been a DJ, I've been at news forever, which does a lot of voiceover, the images, and I use my voice all the time. And I figured, well, this can't be that much of a transition. Turned out I was totally wrong. First of all, the voiceover community really doesn't accept newscasters or DJs at all. In fact, I've tried to never mention that I'm a newscaster, because they immediately pigeonhole you into, oh, well, he's got that news delivery. And it's true. I do. After so many years, I have this delivery that's very direct and very unadorned with all kinds of frilly words like, I know, and and so that didn't really work for me very well as far as doing commercial copy. They want conversational. That's the buzzword. Be conversational, and yet they throw you this 30 seconds worth of copy that's all salesy. And
it's not conversational.
Like conversationally, So
you're like, I would never say this in a conversation.
So I've had, I've done audiobooks, I've done promos, there's a million different niches within the voiceover heading. There's games, there's video games, there's anime. It just goes on and on and on. Network promos, local promos, radio imaging. There's a ton. And I started out thinking, well, audiobooks has got to be great. And I did about 50 titles, and it turns out to be a lot of work for not much pay. It's really a labor of love. So then I switched to commercials, and I had not much luck there because I got this news delivery.
Yeah.
So what I've settled on is a lot of what they call e-learning, which is corporate work that comes to you in the form of slideshows and explainer videos and the training videos that a lot of corporations put out on a certain format that comes through. There's an Adobe. I can't think of the name of it. There's an Adobe program where you build e-learning, which is video and audio presentation together.
Okay.
Now even that is being infringed upon by AI. So a lot of AI voices being used today, and yes, they still sound robotic. It's getting better and better, but it's now infringing on a lot of the marketplace for people who do e-learning, because viewers and consumers of e-learning will tolerate a robotic voice. Audiobooks, not so much.
Really?
So there's
I'm thinking of like just Alexa, and Siri, which kind of have it pretty right, and they still drive me crazy. Like, or if some of the shows that I've seen or things where it's reading back, because I have a house full of kids, so I watch all my
TikTok.
TV.
The audio you hear on TikTok very often is totally automated.
Yeah. There you go. There's a great example, and which raises this really interesting question about AI, because it's becoming a thing. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if down the road there are no newscasters, and it's all just images and
about
voiceover.
That in the newsroom. So how do you trim a budget in a broadcasting or journalistic enterprise? You cut people. People are expensive, so the more people you can cut, the less money you're spending on the operation. So now it's become in even in local TV, and this happened at radio 12, 15 years ago, and that's the automation and the hubbing of operations.
Yeah.
So Sacramento handles the accounting for 20 stations in the West, or we get rid of production staff by installing an automatic production process into the news. And anytime you cut a person, you save some money. So I've been joking to my co-anchor. I said, soon it's going to be AI Dave and Avatar Dave that you'll see on the news. That's really what, it could happen.
Yeah. Well, I've seen roadside newscasters that used to be like the van and like a cameraman or two and a person. There would be a guy with a camera and a guy in the van and a newscaster on the side of the road. Now what I've seen is like a news person
with an
iPhone in their Honda Civic. Like it's not, like they're just doing, I'm like, that poor person is now the cameraman, the producer, the editor,
it used to be a two-man crew minimum. Now it's called an MMJ, a multimedia journalist. And yes, you've got your smartphone and that's it.
Yeah.
It's possible. It's possible because the video is not bad and the audio is not bad either. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. The tools have gotten crazy good.
Yeah. And the better the tools get, like you said, like the more, shareholders, which is so funny to me because we often hear people complain about big business and corporations. And then in the same breath, they're celebrating their 401k. And I'm like, well, your 401k is based on that big business. And that you are the shareholder that's driving the profitability. Like it's this circle. But so in the voice acting, in the voice acting realm, what caused you to go, we need a foundation. We need a way to bring more people, or like, what does your foundation do? And who do you guys serve?
So I feel like every profession comes to a crescendo where there's enough people of the same ilk that they want to organize into a body that sets standards. That holds to the high road. And I didn't see anything like that in voiceover. There's no college courses in voice acting. They just don't exist. And there's no certifying body that, anybody can claim to be a voice actor, and many do. I got a USB mic and a laptop. I'm a voice actor. Bring the sacks of money to my door, and so there's no certifying body. And so I just felt like somebody needs to draw the line. What are the standards? And so me and 3 or 4 other guys created World Voices. And we've now got hundreds of members, people that agree with us that there are certain standards as a producer, as a talent, as a client, as a coach. You have to kind of hold to the line of what's. And so we had a Supreme Court lawyer, a guy who's barred into the Supreme Court. He can't appear as a Supreme Court lawyer. We had him draft a whole series of codes of conduct, and that's what we live by. We like to think it holds people's feet to the fire on what's right and what's wrong. I mean, we're not setting ourselves up as some high and mighty organization. We just think we're stating the obvious. There's also a thing in voice acting that's very true. I'm just prattling on here, so stop me.
You're good.
It's very true about all gig businesses now. So, the freelance photographer, the freelance writer, the freelance webmaster, the freelance graphic artist, the freelance voice actor, they're all subject to finding their own business. And lots of times you end up bidding against your fellow peers, and that dumbs down the price. And sure, people who are hiring you love that, but it also it sullies the profession. You should not have to give in on your price point just to get the job, because you're a professional like anybody else. And so we're fighting that battle too in voice acting.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, I remember as an interior designer, when I worked in Las Vegas, in that industry, we had the IIDA and a couple of other organizations. And one of the things was like a quality interior designer is going to charge X. And this kind of sets the standard, so that if somebody's out there charging well below that, that should tell the client something, and we should hold each other, and it's undercutting your fellow designers, and we're not elevating the industry.
Right.
And I just had this conversation. I have a friend of mine who's sort of a budding graphic designer, and she was asking me like, what do I charge and how do I do this? And I've done graphic design work for nonprofits. And I said, it's really hard because you can charge what people will pay, because there's websites like Fiverr where for $5 you can get a corporate logo,
I know.
and that undercuts the design industry in
Yeah.
some ways. I mean, it's great for the end user, but
And that Fiverr marketplace is not going to go away. It's there to stay now. And so what
yeah,
you have to do as your own boss, because you're a gig entrepreneur, you have to set your own worth and stand by it. I'm not
yeah,
going to go below a certain price. I'm worth it. I've got the coaching, the equipment. I spent the time. I've been practicing. I'm a professional.
yeah,
I'm not going to compete against somebody else who's not for your dollar. I'm going to hold.
right.
And luckily, there are people who can discern that and who will pay you your price because they know you're a professional.
Yeah. I think you're right there. I think that the cream rises to the top, and I think that people will recognize, and they may go through a service, and we'll just beat up on Fiverr because they're easy, but they go through a service like that 2 or 3 times, and then they're like, okay,
Yeah.
I've got to go.
Right.
Let me go find a professional, or
Right.
because every business is going to have this trajectory where they're going to start out with one logo, one thing, but now I need letterhead. Now I need apparel. Now I need, like, there's all these other things. And, that's what I try to help people understand when I do graphic design work for them, is like, they'll come to me with, I want these 12 colors and I want this and I want that. And I'm like, okay, great. Are you ever going to do hats and shirts? Well, probably. Okay, then you need a version of that is 2 colors that we can print
Yeah.
easily, and that you can, and they
Right.
don't think about those things.
You
And
do some educating. Yeah.
yeah, you have to sort of, and that's where I think you can kind of show, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to bring value to your process and to your thing.
Yeah,
And
you should sell yourself as becoming part of their team. You're helping them be successful, and in doing so, you get to be successful
yeah,
too. But you kind of have to just be part of their team and show that you're concerned about their business too,
yeah,
and that endears you to them, and that's seen as a quality person, a quality
yeah.
virtual assistant,
Do
basically.
you find the voice acting journey that you've been on to be the fulfilling piece? Like, I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that the news journey has become sort of a job, and you're great at it, and you're sought after, and so there's value there. But I feel like a lot of times, as industries shift, we have to have a thing that fulfills us. We have to have the creative outlet, because you don't get to be very creative in your day job. I don't imagine. I could be wrong.
No, the creative part of being in voice acting is not so much the talent portion. I got that. The creative challenge for me has been the marketing. So,
Mm,
as a voice actor, I'm my own editor, my own audio engineer, my own marketer, promotional. I do, I've got you wear all those hats at once as a single entrepreneur, and
yeah,
I can do the auditioning and the talent portion. It's the marketing that I really struggle with. But you're right; it's a creative process that I really enjoy. It's a challenge, and it's not just a given to me. After 40 years in broadcasting, I can kind of pick my place
yeah.
because I'm respected in that
You've earned it. Yeah,
area, but I've earned it, right. But in voice acting, I'm just another guy out, just another voice out there. And
yeah,
it's a challenge to buck, all the other good voices out there and their marketing efforts and get the job.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I don't know, tenacity or the drive or the whatever the proper adjective is in that, because a lot of people who would be in your position, who've earned it, would be totally content to rest on their laurels, totally content to make their money, do their thing, stay home, be with their family. And not that you're not with your family. You're one of, I respect you as a father and as a family person. Your
Thanks.
girls are amazing. Watching the stuff that they do is great. So I don't mean to say that most guys
No,
would be home with their
I
family by
appreciate
now,
that.
but that you still have drive to go, how
Yeah.
do I make this better? How do I do this differently?
Yeah.
And
I hope that's not a bad thing. I like being productive and I like being busy. And so in that sense, retirement, retirement a little scares me. And I did retire from TV news in 2017 and it didn't go well for me. I had trouble adjusting with that. And I need to really think about why that went wrong. But then one of the other stations in Vegas came after me and started, and that's very flattering. And especially since I'm an old white guy,
Yeah.
and you don't get jobs anymore. So to have someone come after me and say, we want you, I found that, very flattering. I said, I'll give it a go again. So I'm in my second year now of another go round ever after having said goodbye. But I'm really examining in my own life what it's going to take to leave this very heady, high profile job and become a nobody, and so to speak, and still be happy. And so it's a real transition. And I've spent a great deal of time thinking about it and actually getting counseling on it and trying to figure out how I'm going to make this transition and still be happy. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that because the last time you faced some challenges and like, were you blindsided by that? Like, because I think a lot of people when they retire, they're kind of like, well, this is going to be tricky.
Well, they say there's about 5 things in life that can really throw you. And of course, that's financial troubles, divorce, a move, loss of a job. And I can't think about all 5 of them, but I hit 2 or 3 of those at once. And, and it kind of whacked me. And I didn't prepare well enough. I thought I did, but I found out what a challenge that was for. I'm very driven and I like being busy. Like I said, I like being productive, and to all of a sudden just find myself twiddling my thumbs, it was very uncomfortable for me. So I've got to really work at that. My wife keeps hammering at me. You got to have something. Next time you retire, you got to have something to do. Your brother-in-law has a woodworking shop. Maybe you should do that.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll find something. I've taken up harmonica. What can I say?
I love it. I love it. What? So retirement for you, where do you land? Like, if you could retire anywhere, where would you go?
Well, my wife and I own a home, and I live and work in Las Vegas right now. But my wife and I own a home in Missouri, and that's her home base. I grew up in Illinois, which is close by, and that's probably where we're going to end up because I'm familiar with the Midwest, all the pros and cons of it. There's humidity and bugs, but there's also the lovely change of seasons and rain. I miss rain here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, you don't get any rain out there.
No, you don't. And so it's wherever you live, there are pros and cons. I mean, there's no perfect place to live. So you're in Colorado Springs, which is a great community. I love Garden of the Gods, and it's a very soulful community too. There's a lot of really good spiritual influences there. So you just got to take the good with the bad, and the location doesn't matter. It's the relationships you build that matter, and I'm working on that too.
I love that. I think that's true. I think it's super important to recognize, and we just recently had a message at church about the who, not the what. And it really resonated with me because my wife and I, as you know, we've made a lot of sort of different choices in our life to do network marketing, to build our own stuff, to homeschool our kids. And a lot of that is driven by, I only have these tiny humans for a short period of time. And so we've always, when the rubbers met the road, we've always managed to put the who first. And
relationships are just, they're incredibly, well, it's everything, I think. Relationship marketing is what's going to make you a success in most endeavors. And it's also the very hardest thing to do. Relationships are tough. Keeping friends and keeping family members close to you it takes work. It
does.
It takes energy, and it's not easy, but it's also very worthwhile and endearing. Yeah. And so to me, relationships are the toughest thing, but also the most essential thing about life.
Yeah. How are you managing, if I could ask a very personal question, how do you manage the long distance?
Yeah.
Because your wife still lives in Missouri.
She does. Yeah. And, I think she was less enthusiastic about it than I was. But I really try. I call her 3 or 4 times a day. We have long talks. We have better talks on the phone than we did in person, actually. And I also travel there. In fact, I'm leaving there to go there this weekend. And in another 4 weeks, I'll be there for 10 days. And so I'm doing the back and forth thing. I'm an A-lister on Southwest Airlines. And
I believe I
don't mind. It's a 3-hour flight to St. Louis and then an hour and a half drive down to where we live. And, I feel like I'm entering back into my real place in life when I go there, because I'm from the Midwest and I like the green, and I also like Las Vegas for a lot of things too. It's what I said, the place doesn't matter. I love the West for the austere, dry beauty of the mountains and the big sky country. That's very actually inspiring. But I also love the Midwest, that's what you got to appreciate where you are.
Yeah, I found when we moved here, I was commuting back and forth. I still worked in Las Vegas for a year.
Right.
And doing the big First Friday festival out there as the production manager. So I was flying back once a month, And for probably the first 6 months, I would be like, all right, I'm flying home. And I would fly to Vegas and do the thing. And after about the 5th or 6th month, I remember very distinctly getting off the plane and having not been, I think we skipped a month. So it was like a 2 month break and not hearing the jingle of casino or not hearing. So I got off the plane into McCarran Airport, and was like, oh, this isn't home anymore.
I left home to come here. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was and I still, I appreciate Las Vegas, but this community here with weather and cold, I've really come to appreciate the cold and not like the heat.
Change the seasons. Yeah. I like that. And change is good. I mean, so it tunes you into the changes that life brings. Whereas in Vegas, it's pretty much clear and sunny all the time.
Yeah.
And that's great if you want to plan an outdoor activity, but it also gets monotonous,
Yeah.
And I hear the same thing from people living in the Seattle or Portland. They're like, oh, get rid of the clouds. It's just endless. And bring me some sun. Same thing.
Tell somebody in Seattle you missed the rain.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. They're going to think you're crazy. Well, listen, man, is there anything you want to plug or promote or share?
Shucks, I don't know. If you're looking for a voice, go to Courvo.com, Courvo.com. That's where all my demos are and stuff. But no, other than that, I really enjoy talking about it. And I'm very rarely asked, actually, Keith, to talk about it very transparently. And I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm grateful. Like I said, you were on my chicken list for about 6 months. And I was like, I don't know. He probably gets asked all the time. And
well, I want to thank you. In case your listeners don't know, I called Keith to get his take on some issues about human trafficking, which is rampant here in Las Vegas. And Keith is a ready source on that. And I really appreciated your help too. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm getting ready to hopefully align with a new organization. I've taken about a year off from that work for mental health, and it's heavy.
It's hard.
It's a heavy thing. And I was working very, very tightly with a group, and I talk about it here often, but I appreciate it. And thank you for reaching out to me.
Yeah, you bet.
What a great conversation. And I think the big takeaway for me is like the relationships matter, and take everything with a grain of salt, which is pretty good advice.
Good summation. There you go. There's your headline.
There it is. That's pretty good advice, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. Tell your family I said hello.
Same here. And, thank you.
Do well, man. Let's do this again in a while.
All right. God bless.
Awesome. Take care. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.